Okay, like I told you earlier, the focus on our discussion segment is the northeast part of the country, and we have two experts with us in the studio now to take a look at it. Chigozirim Okoro is a senior program officer with Clean Foundation, a non-governmental organization. Thanks for joining us.
My pleasure, please.
Also with me is Benson Olubo, justice and security sector expert. Thanks for joining us also.
Thank you. Thank you.
Let's start with the lady. The Northeast is one part of the country that cannot afford to have crisis. Before this latest insurgency and the very many problems there, it was lagging behind in almost all indices of development and, of course, Human Development Index. Coupled with this insurrection, this insurgency, this terrorism taking place there, it is beginning to put pressure on an already depressed area. You've worked in that part of the country. What do you think is the situation?
Yeah, the northeastern part of the country is still very, very devastated, going by the Boko Haram crisis in the region. In fact, Clean Foundation conducted an actual research recently with the Ford Foundation to actually interrogate the nexus between unaccountable governance and insecurity in the region.
That's talking about the underlying factors responsible for insurgency.
You know, so at the end of the day, most of our findings are in line with what you just said. One of which is actually endemic corruption in the region, and then we also find out that most of the elected representatives they abuse powers, and so they give room for nepotism, ethnicism, regionalism, religion, to drive politics and governance in the region. And then we also find out that, as at the time we conducted the research last year, we found out that security is still on the high side in terms of threats identified. And we also found out that security agencies are still very weak in responding to identified threats. And then we also find out that even the civil society organizations who are supposed to be driving the process in terms of leading the way and telling the people this is how to go about it, they are weak. Okay, and so that makes civic engagement also very, very weak in the region. So it's a whole lot of problems, but we are hopeful that with this change administration, which is actually one of our intentions, okay, because after the research, we had a summit in Gombe where we brought in all the key actors to actually discuss our findings and also enrich it, and then begin to also prioritize these issues and who does what in terms of responding to identified problems. And so at the end of the day, we came up with what we call the Northeast Declaration on Security and Governance, and which culminated in a communique that was issued. And then Clean also summarized the findings such that it was presented before this present administration.
So you expect them to take action
on
it?
Yes, we have done the needful.
Let's bring in Benson. What she has just painted is what we already know. Yes. The United States international institutions telling Nigeria repeatedly that we must look at the underlying factors engendering terrorism. We must look at it beyond a military response. It appears much of our attention has been on the military option. Increased airstrikes against the insurgents. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, who just visited the country recently, talking about the dangers of misuse, overuse of the military option. It appears we have abandoned the other soft side approach to this terrorism.
Yeah, let's not make a mistake about it. The military option is still very important because I believe Boko Haram has to be defeated. And like the Minister of Information actually stated, he said that there cannot be any closure until the Chibok girls have been recovered. But I think government should adopt what we call a multi-pronged approach. It shouldn't only be military engagement. There should be issues of social and economic rights, which we know is actually one of the key issues. Like Chigozirim pointed out, one of the key things that actually led to the insurgency is failure of governance. And a situation where you don't have representatives of the people being accountable, then that brings up different facets of development where people now want to assert power. Because let's not forget about it that human endeavor revolves around power. Who has the power to act? Who has the power to give instructions and others obey? And that is basically what is happening in the Northeast. Because of the failure of governance over the years, Boko Haram was able to capitalize on that and
recruit very easily.
And recruit very easily. And that problem is still there. If we have people who are in the IDP camps and they don't have access to food, and they don't have access to shelter, and they don't have access to security, there is no guarantee that they can still not be recruited. So the security option is important. It has to be sustained. But there has to be something that should be added to it. And that is the provision of basic amenities. You cannot do without basic food, shelter, and security for those that are in the fringe of the society. Because if that is not lacking, and they have individuals who are ready to provide that, that provides another opportunity for allegiance. And that is why it is easy for you to get young Nigerians who are practically not doing anything, attracted to, is it insurgency? Is it kidnapping? Is it all the evils you mentioned in the program that we've been watching since we came here?
Okay, Chigoziri, if you take a look at the Northeast, in so many parts of that area, they are uninhabited. We hear they've been liberated, but the security situation is not conducive enough for millions who have found themselves in IDP camps to return. This is also affecting issue of governance, the issue of security that I have raised.
Yes, please. Last week, Clean happened to be among the team that met with U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry, and one of the issues we presented was the Northeast, the situation, the humanitarian crisis in the Northeast. And I did mention the need to begin to assess some of these communities, bringing in the expertise of Clean and some of our key partners on board to begin to also get to know how safe are these communities in the first place. I think that will help us. Maybe we can be doing it twice a year for now, and then we'll begin to do it depending on our observations, okay? And the idea is also to help government, civil society, and even international development partners to actually know how these communities are in terms of whether they are safe or not. Because for us, there's also need for the IDPs to go back to their communities, but we need to be very sure that the communities are actually safe and secure for them to go back.
I'm talking about moving the IDPs back. Yes, we are based on international standards, 6 months initial period for humanitarian camps. After that, they should be resettled. But when we don't have governance structure in these places, there were talks by the government to draft civil defense officials and even the police to these areas to provide security. Will it be enough to contain a resurgence of this terrorism? Because the threat is still there, no matter what the situation is.
I think it will involve a combination of different approaches. And I don't think it's wise to ask people to go back to places that are just liberated and there is no governance structure and there is no effective police presence. We know that Boko Haram has been degraded, but they still have the capacity to attack soft targets. And we have also seen those incidences occurring in the Northeast. So a situation where security is not yet guaranteed, and we don't have enough government presence, and we are not assured of effective provision of social amenities, I don't think it is absolutely reasonable to force people to go back to their villages where they will still be prone to attacks and they might still be vulnerable to kidnapping and killing, by Boko Haram elements or even ordinary kidnappers. So I think government has to work with development partners and civil society organizations and those who are working round the clock to ensure that there is both security and safety in the Northeast and that basic amenities are provided. I think when we have that, a lot of people in the IDP camps, they actually want to go home. But I don't think they want to go back to a place where they will become vulnerable. Yeah. So the rider there is the absence of security has to be provided the issue of safety of life and property has to be safeguarded, and then the provision of basic amenities has to be there before they can voluntarily return. And I think they are willing and ready to go. But these infrastructures will need to be there before we talk about voluntary return.
Yes, need for these infrastructures to be there, but Chigozirim, can we afford as a nation, taking a look at our economy, not very sound, negative growth here and there, dwindling revenue from all sources. Look at the IDP camps, it appears you're overwhelmed already. Protests by internally displaced persons, predictions by international organizations that malnutrition, starvation will even worsen in the days to come. Have we met a dead end? How do we get out of this?
I think going forward, we should begin to also, there's need for the Nigerian government to actually partner with both all actors, from local groups, faith-based organizations, civil society organizations, and international development partners. That way, some of these problems, if not all, can be attended to, can be taken care of. You know, there is need for us to also begin to also rethink our strategy. It's not supposed to be just one way, like Mr. Benson said. There's need for us to also continue to change our strategies. If this one is not working, we keep improving, keep identifying key actors that we need to ensure that we actually get to where we are targeting to get. It's very, very vital.
Okay, let's come to Benson. What form of support do you think the actors, political actors, the security heads in the Northeast, what kind of support do they need for us to really reel out and begin to implement this other side of the solution to dealing with the insurgency in both medium term and long term?
I think they still need some hardware. We have seen from the report that we've gotten the successes that have been recorded, especially with the airstrikes. But we're also aware that there have been a kind of voices that have been raised. Of course, when you throw a bomb, you are not sure who will be affected. There's a possibility that majority of the people who will be affected, excuse me, are the insurgents. But it's also possible that citizens,
just like the Boko Haram is claiming that some of the Chibok schoolgirls were killed in airstrikes.
So we've not been able to go there to verify whether they are, what they have said is factual or it's just propaganda. But there is that tendency. I mean, if you look at what is happening in other countries like Syria and Libya, you realize that, of course, in warfare, there are collateral damages, and civilians sometimes are caught up in the conflict. But I think they need hardware that actually helps to sustain the current engagement.
The Chief of Defense Staff only yesterday saying the decreasing revenue, budgetary constraint, preventing the armed forces from acquiring new hardware. Even the Chief of Air Staff talking about the cost of carrying out these airstrikes is becoming strangulating on the defense sector.
Yeah, the reality is that I think there are some partners, I mean foreign partners that are ready to help Nigeria. Where the issue has always been is whether there is that need for us to look inwards and ask ourselves, are there some members of the armed forces that have committed crimes? Because I know there were discussions between Nigeria and the US in the previous administration, the fact why Nigeria was not able to get hardware from them, and the fact that we needed to vet most of some members of the armed forces to realize the issue of whether individuals are involved with human rights abuses. So we have to also deal with accountability. Accountability in the sense that if there are evidences of human rights abuses, there is need for investigation and for the armed forces to take appropriate measures. That is a key issue. And you also realize that the armed forces, especially the military, they have established a human rights desk. Initially, it was in the army headquarters, and we made kind of an advocacy visit. It's saying that if you have the human rights desk in the confines of the headquarters of the armed forces, then civilians who may have grievances to report might find it difficult to go to that armed forces. Now they have moved it out to a civilian space. So we feel that there should be that interaction between civilians and the military. And then issues of human rights abuses, wherever they exist, should be investigated, and it should actually be made open, and those who are found culpable should be punished. I think that gives Nigeria the credibility probably now to request for further support from international communities in terms of the engagement with Boko Haram. And I also think that everything, like I initially said, should not be anchored on just military confrontation. And I'm happy to hear that the president has said he is willing to negotiate. He's willing to negotiate on behalf of the Chibok girls, but that one key thing is that we have to be sure that is negotiating with the right individuals. That's also a political decision that has to be taken. Because we are in a situation where Nigerians want to be assured that the president is doing the needful, not only to safeguard our territorial integrity, but also to put food on the table. Because at the end of the day, you realize that one of the key things that has put the Northeast in the challenges that we are facing in the Northeast is lack of governance. It didn't start with the current administration, but it has been years of neglect, years of lack of governance, corruption, and the rest of other vices that made it possible for Boko Haram to have a foothold. But now that they have been pushed to the brink and we're almost winning the war, I think we also need to win the battle. And winning the battle goes beyond military engagement. It has to do with a holistic approach of providing food, shelter, security, and also getting to the root of youth unemployment. Because that is something that if we don't deal with it, it will still haunt us as a nation. And then the issue of the IDP camps. Nobody wants to go to the IDP camp and stay there forever. Nobody wants to go there and depend on rations. And most of them actually have fields they will always want to go back to. So I think it is the primary responsibility of the present administration to ensure that there is an enabling environment where civilians can go back and be able to sleep with their two eyes open, closed or open, but be sure that they are not subject to kidnap, and that the things that brought them to the IDP does not repeat itself again.
Okay, Chigosirim, the people here, talking about the people of the North, they should have a role to play. We have talked about the role of the government, the civil society, even international organizations, the international community. The people, of course, we know of the civilian JTF, which has played a key role. But of course, what about the civil population?
Yeah, one of the challenges in the region is actually huge capacity gap. Okay, and so that we identified when we were organizing right-based approach for community mobilization to development. The idea is actually to begin to also, train them, mentor them, and let them begin to see themselves as stakeholders.
What do you mean when you say huge capacity gap on
huge
the part
capacity
of the people?
gap? What we did, clean, we identified community-based groups, including faith-based, civil society organizations at that level, and then humanitarian actors. Most of them have responded to victims of Boko Haram crisis immediately at the point of bomb blast. Okay, so they have witnessed it, and most of them have lost loved ones directly or indirectly. And so the idea that was part of the activities lined up by Clean that we just concluded between last year and this year was also to begin to also look at how do we engage the people through these local actors. Okay, so train them and then let them begin to also look for ways of holding their government accountable and responsible, of their...
That is getting them more
yes,
involved
getting them
in
more
their
involved in their
process.
governance processes and procedures. Enough of the blame on the federal government. Enough of the requesting everything, or requesting for everything, or demanding for everything from the government. Let them begin to also see what do we do, and even that training expose them to the pull and push factors that drive violent extremism. Okay, even individual and community factors that drive this extremism. Because some of them, when you hear a mother tell you that I have lost 7 children, for example, which I met people that told me that during the training. And then when we also observed that some of them, because of their traumatic experiences, speaking out when they find themselves in such environment, it's very difficult. Okay, and so when it's not really that easy as we discuss it here. But we in Clean, what we are doing is, we are done with the first batch. We are also rolling out the training.
Okay, Benson, she just said harp on the need to get the people to be more involved in their governance process. Like I said earlier, the Northeast, if you look at the socioeconomic index, very poor, the worst in the country. Talk of child and maternal mortality rate. Talk about illiteracy rate, talk about poverty, is very endemic in that part of the country. How do they get involved in the face of this predicament?
That actually involves the fact that government has to invest heavily in issues of education. That is key. Infant and health mortality is very high, like you pointed out. So government also has to invest in having effective programs that deal with not only infant mortality, but also primary healthcare delivery, because it's also important. But just picking on what Chigo said, there's a disconnect between the governed and those who are governing. And what we noticed, what if you realize, if you read the book, what you realize is that government officials are not being held accountable. And it's as if you're elected, you're your own.
So the people don't realize that it's their responsibility
to hold government officials accountable. And I think that is the key thing.
So there's need for reorientation, education.
Yes.
And continuous re-education.
And continuous re-education. And also for elected officials to realize that they are in positions of trust.
Yes.
And that position of trust is for the people who elected you into power. So it's not just to stay back in Abuja and ignore the people who elected you to power. There is a responsibility. There's a nexus between those who are elected and those who are being governed. And that means there has to be what we call in law consensus ad idem, the meeting of two minds, where if you're an elected representative, you have a responsibility for your population that is elected you into power. And if you are part of the electorate, you also have to hold your elected representative accountable. And I think that is the missing link. It is not only in the Northeast that this is happening. It happens almost in most of in almost the 6 geopolitical zones.
But do you think we are taking steps to correct this anomaly? Are we on a corrective mission, or we have just identified the position, the problem, just like so many others before us now, but we just adopt a sit-down-look approach?
It's incremental. So I cannot say something has not been done, because you are aware that there are some advocacies now for young people to actually now take governance and start being elected leaders themselves. So we shouldn't just allow the people who are above 40 to take positions of leadership. So there is a bill in the National Assembly actually that is encouraging young people to run. So that's a process, but it's still a bill. It's only when it is made a law that we can say you should be acted on. But I think the policy, especially the Ministry of Youth and Sports, should actually have a policy that is specifically deals with the issue of not only unemployment, but the fact that Nigerian youths have potentials to contribute to this economy. And I think until we realize that disconnect between the economy of Nigeria and the lack of agency for Nigerian youths, there will still be that disconnect. It's not only in the Northeast, but it's more pronounced in the Northeast. And I think as long as we neglect the youth, as long as we don't take them into consideration.
But Chicos, it depends on the quality of the youth. I talked of education, illiteracy level, the form of education that is going on in that place, mostly a Majiri education system where skills and competencies are not much impacted, more of studying the Quran. How would these youths take up this responsibility if we don't start from there?
We actually need to start from, ensuring that these youths have, we give them the best of education in terms of quality of education. And I want to speak like a mother now. The girl child education is also very, very vital, going by the traumatic experience of the Chibok girls. There's also need for us to begin to, all actors to begin to also find strategic ways of engaging with these children, so that they will become responsible adults by the time they are grown, you know, and contribute meaningfully.
Okay, very quickly, Benson, do you think we can resolve the very many problems in the Northeast quite soon?
Well, that's a tough question. I think we have all it takes to resolve the crisis. How long it takes to resolve it is the big question, and how ingenious we can be in resolving the conflict and the underlying consequences of the crisis is what would take just more than political will. But I think if the will is there, we will be able to look
That's
closely.
the most important factor.
Yes.
Political will.
Yeah, if the political will is there, I think other things will add into place. And for me, Nigeria, we have gone through series of problems, and we managed to survive. And so I'm positive and confident that we can still survive this one. But that
are you
means
just being optimistic without the necessary evidence to, of course, justify your optimism?
yeah, my optimism is anchored on that simple fact that Nigeria belongs to all of us. We don't have another country we have to call our own. So we should be optimistic, and we have an elected government that has promised change. So we hold them to that.
So you
charge.
hope they will implement the change?
Yes.
So it's still down to hope.
Well, it goes beyond hope,
goes
because
beyond
the president has
let's
promised
just
us
leave it
that
there.
he's going to deal with these issues, and we're going to hold him on the promise which he has made to Nigerian people.
Okay, Benson Alubo is a justice and security sector expert. He was joined by Chigozie Okoro, Senior Program Officer, Clean Foundation, and our attention was in northeast part of Nigeria. The issues on focus were issues of governance and security. And if you take a look at indices and the situation there, we need to redouble efforts. Malnutrition, starvation, facing millions, lack of governance structures, lack of responsible government when you have some little governance structure. And indeed, it is a situation where not just Nigeria, but the international community must partner to indeed tackle the problem right from the roots. Thanks so much for joining us. We return on Thursday, but this time focus on the economy. Receding economy, an economy that is recording negative growth rate. What is this government doing? Are they doing anything at all? Is there need to change focus? Join me on Thursday. My name is Amici Anafua.